Welcome, dear viewers, to a new episode of Dialogue Horizon. This episode will be fully dedicated to the historic event of yesterday, which is the Sudan Partnership Conference. It was a real event in the history of Sudan. It will definitely have wonderful impact on the ailing economy of the country. It also has another dimension of the recognition of the international community and reintegration of Sudan to the international community after being for 30 years completely out of this community, international community. Today we have two gentlemen. We'll talk about the two dimensions of the conference, the partnership conference. One is the political dimension, and the most important is the economic dimension and the future of this conference and the conference, other conference pledged by France, for example, for lifting the debts, which is something positive. So with me, two gentlemen, Professor Manzoul Abdullah Manzoul. Welcome to have you in this episode. It's a very important episode. And also we have our young economist, a very smart economist who had most of his studies in America, and he's following this economic relief of yesterday, Ustaz Abdul Rahim Jamal Sabra. Okay, gentlemen, first we start by Professor Manzoul. Definitely, our Prime Minister, Abdullah Hamdok, played a very important role together with the Finance Minister, Brahim al-Badawi. Yeah. Because both of them, they were in the international community working for a long time. So definitely this had important impact on the response. So first we definitely want to commend the efforts of the Prime Minister, Abdullah Hamdok, and to commend the effort of Brahim al-Badawi, the Finance Minister, and to commend these two people and the civilian government, because they did a big job. They paved the way for a smooth transition to full democratic system after the ousting of the authoritarian previous regime for 30 years. Yeah. So why do you think the invitation or the Abdullah Hamdok and the initiation of Abdullah Hamdok, why did it meet such a big enthusiasm from important countries and above all from the United Nations? Definitely the Secretary General of the United Nations, Guterres, had delivered a very wonderful speech. So can you elaborate on the reasons why these people, all these 50 countries, they converged in such a big meeting, helping one country, which is Sudan? I don't think this happened to many countries in the past.
Well, thank you very much. I think what happened yesterday was a simple translation for the support that the change in Sudan gathered as early as August last year, when the Constitutional Declaration was signed and when the transitional government headed by Hamdok was established. We recall that the first head of state that visited Sudan was the German president. And that visit was actually preceded by the visit of the German foreign minister, Heiko Maas, who was the convener of yesterday's conference. So the conference come as a follow-up to the pledges and support that the international community offered to Sudan when the Hamdok government was formed. Before all of that, Sudan went through an impressive revolution that ousted 30 years of dictatorship, and that brought hope to the world that indeed change is possible, and what happened in Sudan is very positive, and that such a change needs to be supported. So the conference is an outcome of the international community's support to Sudan. Its form is first and foremost a political support, and here I just wanted to make the point that it's not necessary or even desirable to differentiate between economic and political support, because each one of them could be converted into the other. If you get the economic support, then automatically that means you get political support, and the reverse is also true. So I look at it as a very significant event, a very positive step towards supporting the transitional government, and also a very significant step towards bringing back Sudan into the international fold, something that we lost for 30 years. We were a pariah state. Nobody was respecting us. And the very fact that more than 50 countries and institutions, including the UN, the World Bank, the IMF, and the African Development Bank, and the Islamic Development Bank, taking part in such an event, I think in itself proves that we are now a country among respected countries.
Thank you. Abdulrahim, can you first comment on the speeches, the speeches of these delegates, starting by the Secretary General of the United Nations? What do they reflect to you, the speeches, apart from the donation, apart from the contribution? Definitely, almost all delegates, they spoke very well about Sudan, which will give a beam of hope to the country. Can you elaborate on this?
Thank you. I think to reiterate on what the professor said, we can safely say now that Sudan is no longer a pariah state, and judging from the remarks and commitment from all the shareholders or the presence in the meeting or the conference, they seem to be very fond of the peaceful revolution, the mentality which brings about change to a dictatorship through peace while being oppressed, which speaks on the strong will of the Sudanese people. And also it embeds a lot of trust, which is now bestowed upon Sudan from the international community. We have heard the Secretary General of the UN, along with the foreign minister of Germany, speak on their fondness of the Sudanese people, their mentality, and their way of life, which they have encountered during their visits to Sudan. So I think the mentality on the Sudanese momentum or their way of life has changed significantly, and there's a lot of trust now bestowed on the Sudanese people and the transitional government, which will eventually turn into a fully democratic civilian government. We see a lot of hope that was being bestowed from the international community through support, and at the same time they hope that this will also be a beacon in the region to how democracies should be obtained.
So why the last 30 years completely Sudan was isolated and completely nobody was prepared to respond to such a conference, or even to give a helping hand to Sudan, although Sudan passed by crises, so many crises. So what are the reasons for this enthusiasm of these people? Because they like democracy. What do you think the reason is for? I know for the past 30 years.
Yeah, of course, Sudan was an outcast for the last 30 years, and I think the government did not have a lot of trust with the international community. You can see that some of the programs, they were offered before or in smaller bits, and the government may have failed to utilize these funds adequately, or there was misuse, mismanagement, or no debt was paid back. So obviously Sudan had lost the trust of the international community, especially the financial institutions like the World Bank and African Development Bank. People were not reluctant to lend Sudan a helping hand because the outcome was not certain. Now we see that this has changed because there's a lot of confidence being portrayed through the ministers which have been appointed, from Prime Minister Hamdok to Finance Minister Al-Badawi, who was also part of the World Bank for a long time. So they are more certain now of the mentality, the capability, and the effort which is placed by these individuals, as well as the general population, to attain a better life, let's say. So I think it plays a big part significantly when these ministers are actually speaking the same language as the international community, with credibility, with a track record of confidence, respect, and dignity being portrayed. Eventually, it portrays the entire country.
Okay, that's good. Professor, do you think one of the reasons for putting Sudan, having Sudan as an outcast, as Abdul said, do you think that one of the reasons is the atrocities and systematic killing of the genocide of the operations in Darfur and since 2003, plus other factors? Why Sudan was set or put as an outcast, completely out of the international community? Do you think that the civil war also one of the reasons, and this should be taken by the government as an incentive to expedite the peace processes, because one of the requisites of these donors or helpers is to have peace and security in the country?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is an obvious factor, that we had a regime that was killing its own people with impunity. We had a regime that openly says he's going to change the world. A regime that was agitating its neighbors and all of that. So we were an outcast, we were a pariah state, and on top of all that, there was also corruption. And here I would like to say that following what was going on in social media yesterday with regard to this conference, there were people who were comparing the pledges that were made yesterday to what happened in Oslo in 2008, where 4.8 billion of support was pledged and nothing came to Sudan. I think that was simply a result of what you just mentioned. We were a state that's killing its own people. There were atrocities. We had a president who was indicted. We had a system that is incapable of making use of whatever funds that are coming. We have a civil service that is completely destroyed. So donors had no trust. Now we are talking about a situation which is quite different. We had a new government, we had a civilian government. We had a government that's led by people like Hamdok, who were part of the international system. They know how it operates. We had Al-Badawi, who was working in the World Bank for more than 2 decades. They know how these institutions operate. They were clear about what they want from these institutions. They were clear about their policies and all of that. So the comparison is actually unfounded, not realistic, and the context is different. And as we just mentioned, now we are getting the trust of the international community. And I think if we are able to translate such a trust into projects that are beneficial to the Sudanese people, that would really reflect the genuineness and the sincerity of our new government and leadership to move forward with the country. And I think the support that was provided yesterday is a clear message that we are here to support. Let me just add that the German minister in his closing remarks says that there will be another conference next year as a follow-up to yesterday's conference. So there is no way to compare Hamdok's government with Bashir's government and to say that because in Oslo 2008 the 4.8 billion that was pledged was not forthcoming, that this time is going to be the same. This is not realistic, and because the context is different.
It's different. Okay. Abdul Can you tell us about tell the viewer about the size of the pledged money and how its outlays? Will it be something cash? Will it be something? People may be a little bit confused, but even the figures, they talk about 1.8 billion pledged. How is it going to be channeled to Sudan? And how can Sudan benefit from this? And will it has any effect on the currency, national currency value? I mean, the dollar rate, will it bring back the dollar to different figures?
Okay, I think to break this down, the conference was around three pillar stones, which was political support, economic support, peace process. As Professor said, they are all very interrelated, and each part requires the support of the international community in order for Sudan to come over this burden, which is a severe economic crisis, along with the COVID-19. I think in terms of funding, the World Bank probably laid out their commitment, and in this way they led the international community in providing similar support. We know that the World Bank is under severe regulation when it comes to lending and things like this, linked with state-sponsored of terrorism, and the fact that Sudan is heavily in debt to the World Bank and to the international community. Having said that, they still pledged support in a number of ways, beginning with, I think, 35 million for COVID-19 response. They have also helped in the design and have pledged 400 million as the beginning of the 1.8 or 1.9 for the Sudan Family Support Program. This essentially will provide direct funds to low-income families in Sudan. And I think this plays a big part when you want to qualify for international financial programs from the World Bank or the IMF in terms of lifting of the subsidies, because we are now going to be providing direct support to those families as averse to providing subsidized products which may not be utilized by the intended population or even smuggled out of the country. To add on to that, the World Bank is also providing pre-arrears clearance grants, and this is bestowing a lot of faith, again, by pledging to provide money at the time where Sudan is still in debt. Now, looking at the bigger picture, I believe there is going to be a multi-donor trust fund, or all these pledged amounts, they are going to be provided through a trust fund, which is probably monitored by the IMF and the World Bank. And these staff monitored programs essentially provide stabilization for the economy, strengthening the social safety net, and improving overall governance and business environment. We cannot mistake the fact that the programs or the staff monitored programs will be of tremendous help to the economy, and they will provide a lot of development, as mentioned, but they won't essentially bring down the value of the dollar, at least not in the immediate terms. This, however, as also mentioned, will provide the stepping stone so that a parallel program or conference, which will be led by France, will hopefully provide the debt relief program, which will essentially then bring about a better valuation of the currency. If the debt is waived, then Sudan can qualify and borrow more money, which will close our deficit or bring about more development and investment in Sudan, and essentially bring strength to our currency. So on a personal perspective, I think the effect is going to be long-term. It's definitely the right path. We are on the right path. And the World Bank, being the leader of this initiative, will bring a lot of confidence in terms of the countries to which will provide funds, because there will be more assurance that these funds will be utilized in the intended manner this time around, as opposed to what the professor said, the misuse or corruption which was done previously by al-Bashir regime. So again, to just recap on that, I don't think there will be a significant drop in dollar or the hard currency in terms of valuation in the immediate
no immediate
term.
effect.
Yeah.
Okay, Professor Manzoor, still there are some certain issues, important issues, which should be addressed. Do you think that this enthusiasm and this conference is a prelude to first SST, lifting Sudan from the name of states sponsoring terrorism, plus the debts, the foreign debts?
That's right.
Can you tell us about
well,
this?
I think this is absolutely, as I said, a milestone, a remarkable event in the path through Sudan's regaining its place in the international community and also recovering its economy. The U.S., I think, is the biggest pledger of yesterday's events. I think it provides like 360 million USD. And it would be strange to have the U.S. pledging money while insisting on keeping Sudan into the SST list. I think we have already seen some signals that the U.S. is, stepping up efforts to remove Sudan from the list. I saw exchanges between Hamdouk and the U.S. Secretary of State Pompeo, and also I saw a petition that was sent by some institutions to the Congress asking for speeding the process of lifting the Sudan from the SST. This is one. Two, I think for me personally, the most significant outcome of yesterday's event was the pledge from France that is going to organize and host the debt relief conference so that Sudan can make use of the so-called HIPIX initiative, the heavily indebted poor countries. And to me, addressing the question of debts is actually much more significant than pledging money, because we are talking about 60 billion USD in debt, and if that is waived or removed, then as Abdurrahim said, Sudan will be eligible to receive more financial support, more technical support that are instrumental in the macroeconomic policy, in addressing the macroeconomic problems and challenges Sudan is facing. And the very fact that the World Bank and the IMF are leading this is quite significant, because all the donors at the country level, they trust these institutions, they put money under the guidance of these institutions. The trust fund that's going to be established would be run by the World Bank, and as long as you have the trust of these institutions, there is a likelihood that whatever is coming, regardless of the amount, would be beneficial, as long as the country, through the finance ministry, makes sure that it has the right mechanisms, it has the right people at the right place, it has people with capacities to monitor and evaluate the situation, it has people who have capacities to run and manage such programs. And I'm saying this by virtue of my capacity as a previous director for the Mount Center, where I had the chance to interact with the African Development Bank, with the World Bank on projects that come through the Ministry of Finance. One of the key critical problems that the country was facing was absence of qualified people to run these projects. You have a situation where people cannot even write correct project proposals. You have a situation whereby people are not in a position to provide quarterly reports in the manner that is required by these institutions. So I think there are a lot of chances that we can make use of. This is an opening. This is a very significant political support, and I think we need to translate this into actual programs that would put us into the right track. And let me just say that in addition to what we get from the international community, I think we need to augment this by mobilizing our internal resources, human resources, financial resources, and other resources, so that all of this would work in tandem, so that we have a clear path for development and reconstruction.
Thank you. That's very good. Ibrahim, along with this conference and before the conference, some other parallel track was going on between IMF and the World Bank. They started communicating with Sudan, and definitely they have their own strategies and modalities for the economic reform. So we need to couple this event of this conference of the partnership with the track going on with the IMF, bearing in mind that the World Bank is prepared to start by 1.7 billion dollar, provided that they find a way through this debt business. Can you tell us about the negotiation with the World Bank and the reforms stipulated and asked and demanded as prerequisite by the IMF, one of which is the subsidies?
Yes, I think the World Bank put forth a lot of effort in order to provide technical support as well as funding for macroeconomic reforms. They have highlighted this. Significant would be the designing and the funding for the family support program. This would eventually, I think, pave the way for ending the subsidies, which would then qualify Sudan for larger lending, for more economic reforms. What will happen in parallel, if the SST list is also removed, there will be debt relief, because Sudan would then qualify for the process which is known for as countries that are highly indebted poor countries. This relief, as mentioned also by the professor, would then bring about a new horizon for Sudan in terms of support financially, because we are now only tapping at a fraction of the support we can receive even from the World Bank. Because, as mentioned, it is regulated by other restrictions which Sudan has to qualify for before being able to receive resources, which can be the 1.75 billion mentioned by the World Bank, as well as from other financial institutions for economic reform. So I think they're paving the way and being the leaders of this, designing sometimes the programs as mentioned. And Sudan has to continue on maintaining the confidence that it is bestowing now. And when it comes to implementation, this will become harder and harder and harder to maintain the confidence and to make sure that these programs are on track and that the funds are actually moving towards the intended part of the population or the program which it was stated for initially.
What about the subsidy, the 1.9 billion as direct help or direct support to the poor? Almost 80% of Sudanese are needy for this support. Is it just the start of removing subsidy completely, or we have to remove the subsidies first and get the 1.9 billion as direct help, direct assistance to poor people?
Yes, I think essentially removing the subsidies was a major part of the requirements which Sudan has to implement before we can move on to the next chapter of further economic reform or more resources being allocated to Sudan. I think this is probably the difficult part of the reforms, because we have to lift subsidies from essential products and provide direct funds to 80% of the population, $5 per individual per month. So doing so is not an easy task, because you have to first allocate all these individuals, and then you have to have a digital payment system to provide these funds in an adequately manner, so that these people are not affected, or the population is not affected by lifting the subsidies. This task is once again I think very difficult, but they have mentioned that the technical work and even a sample or a pilot project has already been implemented. So now the challenge will be implementing this on a mass scale for Sudan in order to eventually lift the subsidies, which I think is a major part of receiving the reform. And then the government can move on to other parts, such maybe as floating the dollars and other macroeconomic reforms.
Okay. Professor, do you think that this enthusiasm by these people yesterday, this conference, does that indicate or is it a manifestation to the fulfillment of Sudan, the civilian government, the new government, to the fulfillment of some of the problems which put Sudan in isolation, like human trafficking, sponsoring terrorism? Is it something which lead to something positive to peace process? Because peace process is one of the requisites for these people to continue their enthusiasm. So what can you tell us about the peace? Because we have to be considerate. We have to do enough. We are not doing enough in the peace process, and it's just like now, like something absurd.
Well,
tell us about the peace, because now the peace is important.
I think Sudan has moved some steps towards addressing the concerns of the international community. We have seen that in the U.S. Department of State's report for 2019 and 20, there were some positive changes when it comes to human trafficking and smuggling. I think Sudan is now not as bad as it used to be. Also in the U.S. Department of State's report on religious freedoms, we were far better than in the case in the previous years. And a lot of other aspects. And the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister are actually doing their utmost, as Abdul Rahim just mentioned, to address the concerns of the international community institutions when it comes to addressing the microeconomic problems and reforms, because this is part of the requirement. And then when it comes to peace, I think even though the process is still underway, we haven't signed any agreement, but there is a process that's ongoing. And as we speak, there is a delegation from the armed groups and the mediations in Khartoum today. The Sudan Revolutionary Front and the mediators, they are here to boost the negotiations so that an agreement would be signed. So yes, we were not there yet, but efforts, and I must say sincere efforts, are underway to address the international concerns and also to make some breakthroughs in the peace, at least signing an agreement with the SRF and then starting the process, which actually I think already started with the others, SLM North Al-Hilu and SLM Abdul Wahid, so that at the end of the day we will have everybody who is part of a peace deal that addresses the root causes, convinces the international community, and then contributes to consolidating our position vis-à-vis the international community.
So you think that the peace process, the negotiation, the peace, we have to be a little bit serious more, because it is part now, is becoming part, an integrated part of the whole enthusiasm of the international community.
Yeah.
After we address all this, terrorism, corruption, all this now is no longer prevailing in Sudan.
No, that's right.
What remains is the peace.
That's right. And as you recall, during Bashir's regime, the U.S. came with five tracks.
Yes.
And asked the Sudan to implement them before normalization of relations and removing the country from the SSC list. And one of these tracks is peace, which is now being undertaken. The process is underway. It's a bit slow, but there is commitment from the country, there is commitment from the government, and there is also commitment from the other parts. Because even those who were not part of this process, they pledged that they would be ready to negotiate a lasting peace, a comprehensive peace that would address the root causes and that would allow the country to move forward.
Okay, Abdul Rahim, very important issue is now it seems that from what you told us and told the viewers that most of the funds, these funds will go, part of it, sizable part of it will go to the needy, to the poor people, just as something, as dose, a life-saving dose for the economy of Sudan, which is highly appreciated by the international community. But still we are talking about resources of Sudan which need investment, heavy investment. When will conditions be conducive to encouraging investors from different parts of the world, especially from these 50 countries like America and Europe? What can we do? How can we continue on this track?
I think Minister Badawi had highlighted in his opening remarks that they will be focusing investment in health, infrastructure, and education. These, of course, are the pillars for any country to move towards development. I think also all these programs will be highly monitored by the institutions or the World Bank or these countries which are providing the money, because essentially they should provide, as mentioned, economic stabilization, reforms, and a lot of sustainability, which over time will reassure investors that Sudan is a country which is now more investor friendly, even if they are international or local. As we develop infrastructure, as we provide more supports, and our economy improves gradually, it will become more investor friendly, even for Sudanese businessmen and international institutions, because we will be building the foundation for a stable economy, and we will be able to utilize all the resources which are predominantly available in Sudan, but they are lacking the infrastructure or the human capital or the technical support in order to utilize the resources.
Especially, Professor, now people start talking about scarcity or problem in food. The food in the globe will definitely have a surge.
Sure.
Maybe immediately after this corona pandemic, some countries they started talking about food, and everyone knows that Sudan has the fertile land, has the water, has the all resources which can feed the globe and the international markets with the Sudanese organic. Most of our food, agriculture is organic in the terms of horticulture, in terms of fruit, vegetables.
Well, I was in this connection. I was very happy about the statement that was made by the president of the African Development Bank, Dr. Adesina, who visited Sudan in 2017, and a visit was organized for him to Kinana Sugar Company.
Yes.
And he was already impressed by the, as you rightly said, by the huge agricultural land that we have, fertile land, and all these resources. And I think one of the areas that could really be utilized is this agricultural potential, and the African Development Bank is one of the institutions that can support in this.
And livestock.
Yeah, of course, and livestock, because these two go together. So there is a huge potential, and the Sudan also have, Sudan has products that are organic. The quality is quite high, and we can actually supply a lot of countries with our organic products, you know, agriculture and livestock. So this is our chance, and I think the African Development Bank has already expressed its interest and readiness to support this direction. And I believe, and this is linked to a point that I made earlier, that we need people, qualified people, to prepare projects that are feasible, that are well designed, that can attract investment and funding. I think if we can do this, then we have a great potential to supply the world with food and other products, and we are well suited to do this.
Okay, Abdul Rahim, what about adding value? We have. He talked when I talked about these resources, raw material, all of it are raw, like livestock. I think it is shameful to have a livestock traveling all the way from the west to Saudi Arabia, full life, without adding any value to it. Sometimes they say the skin, the hide, the skin of the sheep is valuable and pays more than the meat itself. What about the adding value, and what type of commodities or what type of resources can we add value to it, like gum arabic, like what, livestock, meat processing?
I think adding value is a major part of the economic reform, as essentially the government should be able to provide all the resources required in order to implement and operate value-adding services, such as mentioned in livestock. We're currently exporting live stock without adding any value. If you add value, the return is significantly higher, and you provide a lot of value to the economy. You have people working in the factories for, let's say, meat, which then would be meat manufacturing, deboning, and then the skin would be utilized for leather. So you would bring in a lot of investment. You would allow for a lot of people to gain benefit by operating these facilities. And when you export, the value is essentially a lot higher. Another example, as you've mentioned, is gum arabic, where we nearly don't do any processes here in Sudan. We manufacture the gum arabic, which has been the only product maybe lifted from sanctions or never been under sanctions even during the last 30 years, but we're still not adding any value. We are exporting the raw material, and then the value is added outside of the country. And the benefit is taken by those countries which are operating facilities which add gum arabic, and we all know that gum arabic is used for essentially all types of production, from medicine to food to cosmetics. So it's an essential product, and the value retained from it should be gained by Sudan instead of exported raw. And I think this applies to all the resources which are available in Sudan. So the government has a lot of work to do in providing infrastructure and an ecosystem which hampers the ability to add value to a lot of our resources. I think also this will take time, such as all the reforms now that are underway. It will take time to build on it one by one and provide.
But at least the government should start on some studies, preparing some feasibility studies, because if you have the studies, it's something which encourages the investor. That's right. That you have something sizable. It can be recognized by the World Bank, the IMF, or by the UNIDO of the United Nations. Sure. They have this, but without studies. So, do you think we have to start, or the government has to start on selecting few resources and make in-depth feasibility study ready to be dispatched to?
No, that's absolutely true. And just let me say that I was one of the people who were thinking that before the convening of yesterday's Sudan's Friends conference, Sudan government should have prepared feasible projects that could be supported. But I think still we have time, because as I said, the German foreign minister has mentioned that there's going to be another conference next year to follow what came out of yesterday's conference. So still we have time. We could prepare projects, but above all and before that, we have to be having a very clear investment plan. We have to have an investment authority that is well established, well consolidated, with simple procedures and all of that, so that when investors come to the country, they don't face problems that they used to face during the previous regime. Over and above the projects or studies, which I rightly agree with you that they should be there, we need also to create a conducive environment for the investors and potential foreigners who would be ready to invest in the country.
One of the environments, one of the prerequisites, one of the encouraging tools to the investors is the peace and security.
Of course.
Wherever there is lack of peace and security, no investor will dare to come to any country.
Capital goes where there is security and stability.
So they have to go together.
Of course.
Peace process and feasibility studies. So after 1 year,
that's right.
Peace will prevail. When I say peace, I don't mean agreement, to sign agreements. Peace, real peace.
That's right. That's right.
Stoppage of war, hostilities, DDR, integration of armies.
All these processes.
Once we reach that stage, definitely it's something very, very, very positive, and it will help Okay, Rahim, can you think that in just in nutshell, can you think that this the what happened yesterday in this conference, partnership conference, Sudan, is it a right step? Is it something good and helpful for the country to deliver the country from its economic deterioration, which almost reaching the failure? Will this apart from the political dimension, which is also good, but physically, the economic help, will it help? To what extent will it help the delivering or lifting the Sudan from the, or circumventing being the complete failure?
I think definitely it's a positive move forward. As mentioned, Sudan is under severe economic crisis, and this has been exaggerated by the pandemic. I was very happy to see that even the funds pledged, a lot of timelines were allocated to providing these funds, such as the 400 million by the World Bank by August. And I think a lot of these countries, they essentially recognize that time is of essence when it comes to supporting a country or from collapse. So this was reiterated a lot during the conference, that we need to support Sudan, and we need to support it now because the government and the peace process, as you mentioned, depends on this. Overall, I think there's a lot of benefit and a lot of stake to be taken in by Sudan maintaining democracy and peace in the region, in addition to all the other factors which are coming into play now. So I think the conference will provide a good stepping stone, and the funds, if allocated in the timely manner which have been committed, they will also be of significant help, because these forces, I think they move in parallel. If we see the international community progressing as planned, then the private sector will also progress as planned, because the confidence will be maintained, and the economy will be on the track to recovery over the next coming period. I was happy to hear also that the government has implemented an investment in private sector development authority, which is currently under the finance ministry, to ease the process which was predominantly taken by any investor in when it comes to new investments. They have now taken steps and provided this authority the guidelines to ease the process and to make these bureaucratical obligations a lot lesser.
Okay, that's good.
Well,
Go
I
ahead.
think my last word is that this was a very significant event. It is a very significant political support for the transitional government. We have a very good opportunity. I think the government needs to put its act together so that it makes use of whatever support provided yesterday. And we already saw that the donors were enthusiastic, they were supportive, and they said that this is not the end of it. We will continue supporting Sudan. We will have another conference next year, and we will have a debt relief conference in France sometime. So all this is quite positive, it's quite significant, and I think this was a success for Hamdok and his government.
So I was going to ask you about this, because this actually, in essence, if you go back to yesterday, most of the delegates and the speeches, they are commending and they are admiring the transitional to democracy.
Yep.
So it's in a way it is something very supportive to the civilian partner of the government. Now the government, civilian, the military. So first of all, definitely by these speeches and by the pledges and by this should make it clear that Sudan should continue all the way to the democratic transformation.
Of course.
Anything happens,
Yeah, but
along the road, the whole thing will collapse.
let me add that it is actually our own interest in the country to see this process move forward into a fully fledged civilian government. Of course, we need the support of our international friends and the community, but it is our responsibility, it's our interest as Sudanese people to see that
Yes.
the process move to its logical
Yes.
conclusion.
It's all logical. What do you say, Abdul Rahim? Is it something good for? So it has to be. I think it had to be coupled with some tuning, fine tuning in the civil governance, in the government itself. Many people, they are talking about some, not all ministers, that the governance, the civil governance should have some change or whatever. What do you think of the performance in general, not without mentioning any name or ministry, but in general, people, we have to face it, are not very happy. Even the revolutionaries, but they are patient, very patient. They stood hard time and hardship, but still they are patient and still willing to support the civil government. What will be the role of the civil government after this conference of yesterday?
I think it should essentially give the civilian government a lot of strength and power, even when dealing with the partnership with the military. I believe that the civilian government, as mentioned by Professor Asel, they should get their act together, because from an outsider's perspective, we can always see that the military is very much aligned and very robust in terms of their interaction with the civilian government or with the public. But the civilian government seems to sometimes be a little distorted, or there are some internal disagreements which bring about a lack of confidence from the public and eventually even probably the international community. So I think once again they should also get their act together. They should be very firm in implementing these reforms, and they should be more open, because nothing will get better overnight. People need to know that things will take time, but they need to at least keep their unity and their programs very aligned and very transparent.
Thank you very much. But before we conclude and before we end, we have to say some words to the conductor or to the Sudanese Zainab Mohammed Khair al-Badawi. She played a very important role, and we have to commend her efforts. She did a good job, efficiently and nicely, and was
She was the
star of the conference.
That's right.
Can you say something in few seconds?
Well, I just want to say thank you very much, Zainab Badawi. She really did her best to have the conference succeed, and to me, she was the star of the conference.
Rahim.
Yeah, I have to much agree that bringing all these Sudanese nationals from different backgrounds who have essentially become very prominent in their fields brings about also a lot of sincerity and confidence in Sudanese people in general. And I think it was a very well point to have the moderator as a Sudanese national.
Thank you very much. Thank you, dear viewers, for being with us for the last 50 or 60 minutes in this important event of the Sudanese Partnership Conference of yesterday. I hope to see you next week in a different issue. Bye.